Pack your bags. This house isn't yours anymore. Meline's voice cut clean through the birthday chatter, as sharp as a knife against china. For a second, the room held its breath. Then came the awkward laughter, neighbors glancing at one another, unsure if they'd heard right. Someone at the far end muttered, "Oh, Meline. You're terrible. Trying to smooth the edges. Lazarick. Just back from a week on the road." Gave his wife a puzzled smile. His fork paused midair. I didn't smile back. I let the words sink in, tasting them the way you taste something bitter you've swallowed before. She was watching me for a reaction, her smirk steady, the candlelight catching on her glass. I set my fork down carefully on the edge of the plate, the silver ringing faintly. My pulse didn't race. It slowed, settling into that calm place you reach when you've been waiting for a moment to arrive. Conversations at the table stumbled back to life in uneven bursts, but I could still feel her gaze, heavy and deliberate, pushing my chair back. I rose without haste. "Excuse me," I said lightly, smoothing my skirt. The air in the hallway felt cooler, quieter. Each step I took, pulling me further from the staged warmth of the dining room. In my pocket, my phone was ready, screen lit, with a single name I'd kept at the top for weeks. My thumb pressed the call button without hesitation. It rang once before the familiar voice answered. No questions, just presence. "It's time," I said, my voice steady, low enough that it felt like a promise, sliding the phone back into my pocket. I turned toward the glow spilling from the dining room. Candlelight flickered against the wall, shadows stretching like a stage curtain about to rise. The night's script had been rewritten, and I was ready for my lines. 3 months earlier, I had walked into the kitchen and found a stack of papers spread across the counter. The moment Meline saw me, she slid them into a folder with the speed of someone hiding a secret. She smiled too quickly, asked if I wanted tea, and I let her think I hadn't noticed. Later that week, her laptop was open on the dining table. She had stepped outside to take a call, and curiosity tugged at me. The screen was filled with an email thread between her and a man named Karen Vale. The words weren't hard to find signatures. Property transfer. Care facility paperwork. One line stood out like it was underlined in red, exclusive listing rights. I took out my phone and photographed every page of that thread, my hands steady. That night, I sent the files to my oldest friend, Varys Hollander, who had once been my neighbor and was now a formidable attorney. When she called me the next morning, her voice was clipped. "All business. These signatures are forged. Dravina, and that notary stamp, it doesn't exist." From that moment, I shifted into a role I hadn't played before, one that required patience, quiet, and a certain performance. I began misplacing my glasses, asking the same question twice, and pretending to forget details about the house. I spoke openly about downsizing and being a burden, feeding the story Meline already wanted to believe. I let her think she was in control. She grew bolder, leaving her phone on the counter with messages flashing from Karen, speaking more freely when Lazarick was away. Every slip she made was a thread I tucked away, weaving a net around her without her even noticing. By the time the leaves started to turn, I wasn't just prepared for what she might do, I was counting on it. And on the night she told me to pack my bags, I knew exactly which knot to pull. Varys didn't stop at confirming the forgery. Within a week, she had her private investigator trailing Meline. The first report came with grainy photographs Meline and Karen sitting too close in a quiet corner of a wine bar, their hands brushing more than once. The next set of photos left little doubt, the two of them walking into a downtown hotel just after noon, leaving 3 hours later, both looking satisfied and careless. Receipts from that day showed charges for champagne, room service, and a florist's bouquet, Phone records painted the same picture: daily calls, late-night messages, bank statements. Once we obtained them, revealed small but regular transfers between Meline and Karen, always just under the reporting threshold. They weren't just conspiring over my home. They were tied together in ways Lazarick couldn't imagine. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I adjusted my performance. I began mentioning how overwhelming the upkeep of the house was, how maybe a simpler life would suit me. Meline would nod sympathetically, offering to help with the hard decisions, her eyes glinting with the confidence of someone who thinks the prize is already hers. Lazarick remained in the dark. His job kept him on planes more than at home, and Meline curated every word he heard. She painted me as fragile, forgetful, needing more support than she could give here. He would call me from airports, telling me he worried, that maybe a smaller place would be better. I kept my voice light, telling him I trusted whatever he and Meline thought was best. All the while, the file in Varys's office grew thicker: photographs, statements, legal analyses. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building between Meline's plan and its success. By the time the first frost came, I knew the shape of her scheme better than she did. I also knew that if she thought the stage was hers, she'd perform her undoing in front of everyone who mattered. That was the moment I was waiting for, and I wouldn't have to wait much longer. It was Meline who suggested the birthday dinner. She announced it one evening while Lazarick was home for a rare weekend, her tone bright and generous. "We should do something special for your mother," she said, glancing at him but keeping her eyes on me. "Here, of course. Invite all the neighbors, your friends from work. Make it a real celebration." I agreed without hesitation, though I could feel the shift beneath her polished offer. A crowded room would give her the perfect stage to make whatever announcement she'd been holding back. And for me, it would be the perfect audience. The next morning, I called Varys. We reviewed the evidence, checked the legal filings, and confirmed the timing. By the date of the dinner, every document would be in place, restraining orders on the property, fraud complaints ready to file, and warrants prepared to be executed. All I had to do was give the signal. Varys worked out the logistics with the local police and a court officer she trusted. They would be stationed nearby, waiting. The signal would be simple: one call from my phone. No explanations needed. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, I played my part with care. I let Meline see me looking at brochures for senior communities, pretended to lose track of dates, even left a grocery list half finished on the counter. She would smile faintly, as though the pieces were falling into place exactly as she wanted. I spent quiet evenings in my room, rehearsing my expression in the mirror. I wanted the right balance, calm enough to unsettle her, unshaken enough to make her wonder. This wasn't about shouting her down. It was about letting her walk straight into her own ruin. When the morning of my birthday arrived, I knew she thought the night belonged to her. She had no idea it had been mine from the moment she handed me the invitation. On the morning of my birthday, I was in the kitchen early, dusting flour across the counter and rolling out pastry for the dessert. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the air, warm and steady. I laid out the best silverware, polished until it caught the light like water. Every plate, every glass, every fold of the napkins was deliberate. Meline moved through the house like a director checking her set. She adjusted a vase, shifted a chair, and gave instructions in a voice pitched just loud enough for the arriving caterers to hear. Lazarick, smiling at the bustle, kissed me on the cheek before heading out to pick up wine, leaving her free to orchestrate. By late afternoon, the living room was a hum of conversation as neighbors and friends arrived. I welcomed each guest warmly, noting the way Meline stood slightly ahead of me, greeting them as though she were the true hostess. She laughed too brightly, her hand brushing Lazarik's arm when he returned, her voice carrying over the clink of glasses. And then I saw him Karen Vale, dressed in a tailored suit, carrying a wrapped gift and wearing the polished charm of someone used to selling dreams. He introduced himself to Lazarik as an old acquaintance, shaking his hand with practiced ease. Meline's eyes flicked to him, then to me, a flash of something almost triumphant passing between them. I kept my smile. The pieces were all in place. The guests, the wine, the unwitting husband, the lover dressed as a friend. I poured tea for an elderly neighbor, listened to stories I'd heard before, and let the evening settle into its rhythm. Through it all, I felt the weight of my phone in my pocket. The name at the top of my contacts list waited. Silent, but ready. The moment hadn't arrived yet, but it was close enough to taste. When dinner was served and the candles lit, I took my seat at the table. Hands folded loosely in my lap, I knew exactly how the next hour would unfold, and I was ready for her first move. Dinner was nearly finished when Meline rose from her seat, tapping her spoon gently against her glass. The sound cut through the chatter, drawing every gaze to her. She wore the kind of smile that said she'd been waiting for this moment all evening. "I have some wonderful news to share," she began, resting a manicured hand on Lazarik's shoulder. "We've made arrangements for Dravina to move into a beautiful care facility, one of the best in the state. She'll have everything she needs and won't have to worry about the upkeep of this big old house." Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table. Lazarik started to speak, but she placed her hand over his and kept talking. "And the best part, we've already taken care of all the paperwork. Everything is signed and ready. It's truly a gift to know she'll be so well cared for." Her words floated in the air like confetti, false and glittering. She reached for a folder beside her chair and held it up as if it were proof of her generosity. From where I sat, I could see the faint watermark on the forged transfer papers, the very ones Varys had shown me weeks ago. Some guests nodded approvingly, whispering how thoughtful she was. Others shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to me as if unsure how to react. I kept my expression composed, letting a faint smile touch my lips. "Well," I said softly, "that's quite something." I set my napkin down and stood, smoothing the front of my dress. "If you'll excuse me for just a moment." No one stopped me as I stepped into the hallway. The air felt cooler away from the dining room's warmth. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and pressed the top number on my contact list. The voice on the other end answered instantly. Now, I replied. I ended the call, slid the phone back into my pocket, and turned toward the glow spilling from the dining room. In 10 minutes, the door would open, and the real announcement of the night would begin. Exactly 10 minutes later, the sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the low hum of conversation. Chairs scraped, voices fell, and Meline glanced toward the entryway with a faint frown. I moved before anyone else could, crossing the room at an unhurried pace. When I opened the door, Varys stood there in her dark suit, flanked by 2 uniformed officers and a court officer holding a leather portfolio. Gasps rose from the table as they stepped inside. Varys didn't wait for introductions. She walked straight to the dining table, her heels firm against the wood floor, and set the thick folder down in front of Meline. "These," she said, her voice clear and even, "are copies of property transfer documents you attempted to file using a forged signature and an invalid notary stamp?" Meline's face shifted from irritation to something paler, her hand still resting on the folder she'd been showing off minutes earlier. Lazarik's brow furrowed as he looked from her to Varys. The court officer pulled out a stack of photographs, Meline and Karen entering hotels, sitting close in restaurants, meeting in his office to sign papers. The evidence fanned out across the table like a deck of cards dealt in silence. Varys continued. These images, along with bank records, confirm your ongoing affair with Mr. Karen Vale and your joint plan to sell this property without the owner's consent. Eyes widened around the table. A few guests shifted back in their chairs, as if afraid of being too close to the center of the storm. Lazarik's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. Meline, is this true? She opened her mouth, but no words came. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Varys stepped aside, allowing the officers to move forward. You are hereby served, the court officer said, placing documents in front of Meline. The click of the portfolio's clasp closing was the only sound as the next move began to unfold. Meline's hand trembled as she reached for the papers, her eyes scanning the first page before darting to Lazarik. This is some kind of mistake, she said, her voice pitched higher than usual. Tell them. Lazarik, you know I've been taking care of everything for your mother. Lazarik didn't answer. He was staring at the photographs spread across the table, his jaw tightening with each one he turned over. When his gaze landed on the image of Meline and Karen stepping out of the hotel, her arm looped through his. Something in his face broke. I trusted you, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Meline pushed back her chair so abruptly it scraped the floor. You can't believe this. They're twisting things. Karen was helping with the property sale because your mother. She stopped herself, glancing at me, then back at Lazarik. Because she's been confused, forgetful. You've seen it. Varys didn't flinch. The only confusion here is yours. Mrs. Vale, we have sworn statements from your notary, confirming they never met Dravina, and digital metadata proving the signature was copied from an old mortgage document. The care facility application you submitted was also falsified, complete with medical records that never existed. Meline's breath came faster, her composure slipping. You can't do this in front of everyone, she hissed, but it was already done. Around the table, guests sat frozen, some exchanging glances, others pretending to study their plates. The officers waited, their presence steady, immovable. I kept my hands folded in my lap, letting the silence stretch. Lazarik finally leaned back, his voice cold. If any part of this is true, Meline, we're finished. Her lips parted as if to speak, but the court officer stepped forward, placing the formal notice into her hands. The weight of it seemed to anchor her in place. Varys closed the folder, her eyes meeting mine briefly before turning back to the room. We'll be leaving now, but further contact will be through legal counsel. The officers guided Meline toward the hallway, and every step she took felt like the unraveling of a carefully staged play. When the front door closed behind them, the house felt strangely hollow, the noise of the party replaced by the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the dining room clock. No one moved at first. The guests sat with their forks suspended, eyes flicking between Lazarik and me. I reached forward and began stacking plates, the silverware clinking softly. It gave people something else to look at. A few of the neighbors rose to help, murmuring quiet words, half sympathy, half relief to be away from the center of the scene. Lazarik stayed in his chair, staring at the space where Meline had been. His wine glass was still half full, the condensation sliding down its side. I didn't know, he said finally, his voice rough. I swear to you, I didn't know. I nodded. Not unkindly. I believe you. Varys remained standing by the wall, her hands clasped in front of her. The restraining order on the property is active as of an hour ago, she said. She can't come back here without violating it. The fraud case will move quickly. Given the evidence, Guests began slipping out, some offering hugs, others just a small nod at the doorway. I walked them out, one by one, the air outside crisp and smelling faintly of rain. When I returned, Lazarick was helping gather the last of the dishes. Everything she told me made sense at the time, he said quietly. She made it sound like she was protecting you. I placed a hand on his arm. That's what good liars do. We carried the final tray into the kitchen. The counters were cluttered with half-empty serving dishes and stray crumbs. But the sight of it felt like a victory. This was my home, untouched. Still mine, and tonight had proven it wouldn't be taken. Varys collected her folder from the table, tucking it under her arm. I'll check in tomorrow, she said. Get some rest. Dravina. I walked her to the door, the weight in my chest easing for the first time in months. But as I turned back toward Lazarick, I knew the night wasn't over just yet. After Varys left, Lazarick and I stood in the kitchen, the hum of the dishwasher filling the quiet. He looked tired, older than he had when he walked in tonight, and I could see the weight of the truth settling over him. I should have been here more, he said. If I'd paid attention, I shook my head. She made sure you wouldn't. That's not on you. We sat at the table with 2 mugs of coffee, neither of us drinking much. I told him how I'd discovered the emails, the forged papers, and the meetings with Karen, how I'd known for months and waited for the right moment. He listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on me in a way that reminded me of when he was a boy, absorbing every word. When I finished, he leaned back, exhaling slowly. You played it perfectly. I don't know if I could have stayed that calm. Calm is easier when you already know how it ends, I said. He nodded. And for the first time in a long while, there was no wall between us. Before heading upstairs for the night, he asked if I'd be all right. I told him yes, and meant it. I watched him linger at the bottom of the stairs for a moment before he finally turned and made his way up, leaving the house quiet once more. The house was still. I walked through each room, touching the familiar surfaces, the edge of the mantel, the smooth banister, the worn kitchen table. Nothing had been taken from me. Not the walls, not the roof, not the life I'd built here. In the living room, I closed the curtains and turned off the lights, the quiet settling like a well-worn quilt. This was my home, and no one would decide otherwise again. I went upstairs, the creak of the 3rd step sounding the same as it always had, and felt the smallest smile tug at my lips. The battle was over, but the victory was mine to keep.